Thanks to the ATypI for having me here. I'm going to present you the result of the PhD I've done in the last years at the Royal Danish Academy. The subject of the PhD originally was legibility for low vision people, but then in the period where I was supposed to do the testing, it was during the pandemics, and then the low vision organizations wanted to protect their members, I think with good criteria. So we had to shift the subject a little bit towards normal vision people. But I don't think that's really a problem, because I'm not going to present you here an experiment or specific data from an experiment, but actually this is an experimental paradigm that I think has a lot of potential. It's extremely flexible, and it uses a Bayesian algorithm of artificial intelligence and a variable font. And yeah, it basically can adapt to almost, I think it has the potential to adapt to almost any scenario and any kind of user. And so yeah, so don't take anything I'm going to say here as any kind of universal claim about legibility, because it's actually quite the opposite, precisely. Whoops. It's, you're going to see the data we've extracted in a very specific reading situation thanks to this experimental paradigm, okay? Some of you have already seen a presentation of mine, so thanks for being here. There's going to be new data. Some of the slides are going to be repeated, but there's going to be also new data, okay? So, as I said, my PhD, I've done it at the Royal Danish Academy. There is the department, the Center for Visibility Design, led by Sophie Baya, who she's also my PhD supervisor. And there at the department, we are designers, type designers. There's people with a psychology profile. We have contact with different hospitals, the ophthalmology department of different hospitals at Copenhagen. So probably, and the primary task of the people here is actually not teaching, but doing research. So probably when it comes to typography and legibility and research, is one of the most powerful task force right now. Yeah. I want to use this slide, by the way, to credit some people that has helped me a lot. This is a very multidisciplinary research, so I could haven't done it on my own. So people that definitely contributed to this work: a good friend of mine from high school, Inigo Artieda, then two colleagues from the department, two former colleagues from the department, Katsumi Minakata and Kiran Otherkirk, extremely patient guys that I've been bothering them with a lot of questions. Of course, Sophie Baya, my PhD supervisor, also very patient with me. And also I want to credit these three guys. They have helped me a lot. Very smart, nice guys. Florian Kadner, Shiva Kalyan, and Miguel Valencia. Their contribution has been instrumental. All of them, they have helped me a lot to build what you're about to see now. I wish they were here, but they're not. Yep. So I'm not going to talk too much about the theoretical part of my PhD, although I love to do it. So if you have any questions about it, just grab me outside, and I'll love to talk a lot about it. But if you ever get the energies to read my PhD, I should tell you that one of the things I'm the most proud of is the conceptual relation I have created in between some of the fundamental findings and things we know about vision, more specifically, whoops. Yeah? Something happened? Okay, it's okay, I can just go on. So more specifically, things we know about contrast sensitivity, how we perceive black and white shapes in space, how we perceive things, the spatial distribution, and so on, and how those things are related with the tools I've used in my paradigm, variable fonts, and this explorative Bayesian algorithm, okay? Now we really need the images. Okay, good. So, as I said, I'm not going to talk much about my PhD, but I want to tell you something about the things I've done. There is one specific approach to legibility where you could look at letters and try to increase their individual features to make them more visible or legible from the distance to perform better. So this is a classic example where you have an E and then you increase, for example, the opening of the letter. So theoretically, it might work better from the distance. But my approach in my experiment has been more looking at the relation of black and white shapes. Okay, so looking at the typographic patterns, looking at the effect of weight, width, and contrast in legibility. Okay, so when you approach legibility this way, you approach fonts in mass. So it's not about enhancing individual features, but more about treating the whole font and then expanding condensing, expanding, you will see now. So I'm going to introduce the experiment in a very similar way of how I experienced it, because I thought it was only about building the font and the algorithm, but then there was a third chapter that caught me a bit by surprise. The font that I've built, it's a variable font. The design in general is quite aseptic, but it's a hyperflexible font. And I say it's hyperflexible because it's not built in the canonical way, where you usually, for example, when you're about to expand the weight in a font, many times what you do is you expand the darker part of the letters towards the inside, but then you are changing the white shape of the letter, the counter shape, in kind of an arbitrary way, and it depends a lot on the will of the designer. So in my case, in my variable font, in Octavio, I've used the parametric approach developed by David Berlow, and that in the last years have been expanded by the Google Fonts team with the Flex projects. And if you're not familiar with it, let me just explain it really quick what's happening here. Here there are 3 axes of variation. One is called the X opaque, which means that it's changing the opaque part of the letters on the X axis, on the horizontal axis. Then on the right, there is the X transparent, is the axis that changes the transparent part of the letters or the counter shape of the letters on the horizontal axis. And then on the bottom is the Y opaque, or the axis that changes the opaque parts on the vertical axis. Okay? So when you build things like this, fonts usually are quite complicated, and they require a very complex design space with a lot of in-between masters to make sure that you hold the design still. And even so, you can't avoid to have some instances in space that they look just completely awkward and like monstrosities, like the one on the left. But then some other parts of the space, they just look to the casual observer, they just look like another grotesque out there, right? And then you have instances with contrast, very expanded, very contrasted, very different elements inside this three-dimensional space. Okay, but when you do things like this, then Octavio, it becomes a very powerful tool to study precisely typographic patterns. Okay, so on the top there's Helvetica, and then Octavio on the bottom, mimicking the typographic pattern of Helvetica. Then here you have Din. Okay, it's gone again. Good. There you have Din condensed bold, and then on the bottom, Octavio mimicking the pattern of Din condensed bold. Acumin, white, ultralight, Octavio adapting to that, or even Optima bold. Okay, so I'm not saying that the fonts are the same, but in terms of the typographic pattern, they are quite close, right? So you can use Octavio just to study their different configurations, just with one single font. So then with the font, after the font, we had to build the algorithm of artificial intelligence. One of the things I've learned in this PhD is that artificial intelligence is a very fancy name to say very efficient data management, and that is precisely what the algorithm does. Okay, so we have this three-dimensional space with the 3 dimensions I just explained you. You know, at this point here, the font had around 12 million instances, so obviously we cannot test all those instances in an experiment. So I'm going to show you how the algorithm behaves, and then I'll explain you the experiment after that. So the movements of the algorithm in the space, it's a combination of random and intentional movements. Okay, so it starts at a random position in space looking for high performance candidates. It can be high performance in terms of reading speed, visual acuity, whatever. So in this case, let's imagine that it's jumping over there, and suddenly it finds a spot where actually there is a high performance candidate. So it explores more in that specific area just to make sure that that's not an accident, but it's actually a reliable place. You know, like things around there actually perform better than in the rest of the space. But then after some trials in that specific area, we jump randomly to another point in space, random position, just to make sure, just to find out if there is also something happening there or not. If the algorithm finds something, it's going to explore that as well. If it doesn't, it will just return to the previous area. Okay, so in that way, we mix random and intentional movements, trying to understand how the visual performance, the visual profile of that specific participant works. Okay, so now you know the font and the algorithms, so try to understand in the experiment. It's relatively easy. We throw 100 paragraphs of text to each participant, and then they will have to read it, press a button when they start, press a button when they finish. We also check, of course, reading comprehension. We had other measures there. But then you can see, here you can see the algorithm exploring the different parts of space. So of course, some configurations were just very awkward, but some others, they will look perfectly normal. Some others will be wide. Some others will be very condensed, etc. Okay. And yeah, at this point, we finished the experiment. I thought we were done. But then it came the third part. You know, for those of you who have experience with research, probably you're going to laugh when I say this, but I didn't expect actually the data to be so complex to handle and to manage and so on. Okay. Let me show you. This is a video. This is a little, whoops, a little Python script. No, go back. Here. Can I, hello? Okay, here. Thank you. So this is a Python script we have to analyze data right after the experiment. Okay, so what you're going to see is information that we have right after we finish the experiment for each participant. This is where we check the comprehension. So we check the results of the multiple choice questions. In this case, the result was so-so. Then the next thing we see is the reading speed, the histogram of the reading speed. One thing you should know is that we increased the reading speed of the participants. I don't recall the exact figure, but something like 16 out of 22, 17 out of 22. They increased the reading speed through the experiment. Okay. Then the next part is the cool part. Here is where we have our three-dimensional space, and then you can see the points, how the algorithm has been navigating. Blue points, slower points, red points, faster points. Okay, so here you can see how the algorithm has located. This is a very successful case because you can see, let me just move it here. You can see how it's very obvious that definitely these font configurations were working much better than these ones. But something that is very cool, if you have experience with type design, is that the units you're seeing, the units you're seeing here, and you're going to be seeing in all the graphs along this presentation, are actually units of M. Okay, so you can try to picture a little bit the font, for example, at this space here. Okay, so we're talking of a X opaque. You need to picture letter N as the key letter here. So we have X opaque, 100 units of stem for the letter N. Yes. Then we have here on the left X transparent. That will be another 100 units in between the stems. So we're talking of something because 100 units is not that bold, so it's probably something quite condensed. And then if we looked at the Y opaque data here, kind of similar to the contrast, we follow the line, it's another 100 units. So that's kind of a low contrast thing because the value is pretty similar to the stem value. Okay, so because I'm using units of M to map the space, if you have experience with type design, you can actually understand a little bit what's happening here. Okay?
Pardon me, is that a 1,000 unit M square you're using?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so, and yeah, and the last part, here. Here we have the 3 dimensions isolated, so we can see the impact of the impact of each one of the dimensions and understand better what's happening here. So you can see how, in this case, here on the left, the values of the axis, and here the words per minute on the bottom. So we can see how, for both the stem thickness and the kind of letter width, the inner space, lower values were leading to faster reading rates. I will explain you now in a second why was that. So here we have another graph that we use also to analyze, to understand these trends, to understand what was going here. So words per minute on the left, the X opaque dimension on the bottom, and here you see you have all the trials of all the participants to understand, the global trend of what was happening here, like the global requirement for legibility for all the participants here, and then the blue line is the average, the slope. Yeah. So you can see again, lower X opaque values were leading to faster reading speeds. Yeah. All the dimensions, same, X opaque, X transparent. Once again, I want you to understand much better like the potential of the paradigm and not necessarily the conclusions, although I will explain you my thoughts about the data now in a second. And of course, we can crisscross the impact of dimensions to find some potential relations, okay? Here you see again the X transparent versus the X opaque with the reading speed. We keep finding how lower values, the values that get closer to the origin, tend to give us faster reading rates. Different dimensions here, different crisscross, analyzing the data. Okay, so what happened here with why lower values were actually giving us faster reading rates? Okay, here I think that my hypothesis is there's 2 factors in play here. One is eye movements, okay, or eye movement patterns with condensed fonts versus wide fonts is different. Condensed fonts give us longer fixations because we have to process more information in our visual span, but then the jumps are wider because in terms of number of letters. Okay, so we make wider jumps. Okay. On the other hand, wider fonts, we have faster fixations because there is less information, but then the jumps are smaller. The saccades are smaller in terms of number of letters. Okay, so that's factor number one. And then factor number two is we didn't isolate number of words per line. Okay, so for some people, actually, with the wide configuration, they will be getting 15, 16 lines paragraph. Narrower configurations will result in 5 lines paragraph. So line jumps are actually the slowest eye movement there is. So traveling from the end of one line to the other one, that's actually the slowest movement we have when we read. So hypothesis is that the two factors together resulted in that condensed fonts were actually read faster by people than actually wider fonts. I'm not the first one in declaring this effect. Colors in 1981, in a experimental setup rather similar to mine, he declared that the right paragraphs were read faster than the left one. Okay, so yeah, this was the first part of the data. And then the second part, my real ambition for this paradigm is for it to be able to actually propose to prototype candidates, font candidates for each participant almost on the fly, okay? Once again, I thought this was going to be so easy because, you know, here you have the three-dimensional space, you have all the red points here, come on, it cannot be that complicated, it must be somewhere over there. But then from a statistical point of view, it's not that simple. So we tried several methods, several methods of clustering. The first one where we ended when we thought we had something, it was here. So we thought, okay, so this is the font candidate for each participant. But then it is true that we look at the data and there were some conflicts on the data because the linear regression data, all this two-dimensional data is telling us that lower values lead, narrower ladder fonts lead to higher performance. We look at the three-dimensional models, and that's what we have, definitely. Apparently, like the lower values are giving us faster performance, so probably there was something wrong on the clustering we did. And I'm explaining you this because if you ever read my PhD, right after this is the end. The school was pressing, I had to deliver, and then this was kind of the end of the story. However, after delivering, I've kept researching this. Okay, so now we're in a much more promising point. We've done something that a few weeks ago it didn't look that logic, but right now it looks extremely logic, which is we tried several ways of approaching this three-dimensional space. We tried center of masses, different methods of clustering, but now we've done something that, we have 100 points for 100 trials, minus the outliers. And then we divide them in 4 quantiles, so 25 points in each quantile, and then we graph the fastest one, in this case, the red one, and then that's the one that we cluster, okay? And then we are starting to get configurations that reconcile the linear regression data, the two-dimensional data, and the experience and the spatial data we have. So this makes me very happy because I feel that we're really close. We're not there yet. There's still things that need to be fine-tuned, but we're pretty close. A final reflection on this is that when I was working on this, we were working on this 2 years ago, I felt pretty much like this. Like, boom, like legibility hacked, boom. And this feeling lasts for quite some time. But I should admit also that in the last 6 to 8 months, I felt a bit more like this. I don't know if you heard of the AI apocalypse. I am one of the believers, there's a lot of people talking about it, and I feel like there's not enough people talking about it. So it makes me sometimes, I need to double think a lot if, that I've built something that is definitely a tool that can potentially feed up the beast. Yeah. So that's why I keep using this image for my presentations. This is the Curiosity rover in Mars. This is a piece of hardware that is wandering around a planet far away, just looking for information and then sending it over. I feel like this paradigm is a bit like that. Like we can throw it in situations where no type designer has ever been there. No type designer has ever had a scotoma mixed with cataracts And then try to read something and then come back and say, you know, guys, make the letters wider because that's what works. You know, no, we don't have that kind of information, but now we have a tool that potentially can bring us this information. So I like to think of this image because it reminds me that we're explorers, you know, that we need to keep asking relevant questions. But honestly, I think it's even more important for type designers, okay? Because I think the beast is a real threat in the sense, you know, there's a lot of things going on and there's many things coming, I'm sure. So it's very important for us, for those who are interested in research, to keep asking relevant questions. So we're reminded that we're not only test subjects, but we're also the ones driving the machine. Yeah. And you have any question, please? Okay. Sure.
We don't have a mic.
Oh. Do you want this?
Yeah, for recording purposes, it'd be ideal if the questions are asked on a mic. But my question is, I wouldn't be at all surprised if your results varied by groups of readers, people with different kinds of visual acuity, people of different ages, people of different levels of experience. Who were you testing on, and did you try to isolate for different characteristics of readers?
Yeah, okay, so we tested normal vision people. We didn't, we just defined an age group, and we didn't isolate much more beyond that. But so far we've seen that the algorithm has a different sensibility depending reading speed. Okay, we've seen that. To be honest, I am not sure if that's necessarily an issue of the algorithm or is actually an issue with the whole concept of legibility. Let me explain you what I mean. Like, you know, if you are a fast reader with a lot of experience and you want to reach a reading rate of 450 words per minute, every factor should be pretty well aligned for you to read at that speed. If you're not, if you're not so used to read, but you're still a smart person and your cognition works perfectly fine, you can probably absorb 200 words per minute easily, no matter if you're using the cat rate font or maybe something not so fine-tuned. That's, again, my theory. But in any case, that's one of the things that we definitely need to keep testing. You know, keep testing how it behaves with other group of people, low vision and so on. Yeah. Should I just point people? Sure. Please. Sorry.
You had a slide with the data which showed the correlations with the three axes and words.
Yes.
A bit further back, where there's actually the correlation. That doesn't look like a particularly strong correlation.
Okay.
It looks like there are fast readers at every space and slow readers at every space.
Okay. I mean, I didn't mention this. Well, this word per minute, it's logarithmic, but it's still. This is what we got. I don't know.
Right. So did you test the hypothesis that the font doesn't actually matter at all?
Yeah, what were your
What were your R values?
what were your R values for this?
I don't know. I don't exactly what do you mean? Like what?
R values, the strength of the correlation and the probability that these did you test the probability that these variations could have been due to chance?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
I mean,
Sort of standard.
we know.
Statistical significance?
Yeah, we did find that.
Okay.
Okay.
That's what
Yes,
I was-
okay.
that's right.
Good.
That's right.
One thing I can tell you for sure, I mean, it's not exactly what you're asking, but one thing I can tell you for sure, for example, is that habit didn't have anything to do with it because of the arbitrarity of the font. Okay, but we did find. I have the data. If you want, I can show it to you. Okay.
My question kind of correlates with the first question, but in a different perspective. How do you think that the background of the readers, in terms of typographic conventions, might have affected the outcome? Because we're like in a time where low contrast fonts are widely used. So if we would have done this, if AI was available like 1 or 2 centuries ago, where high contrast fonts were more used, do you think that would have influenced the outcome in providing, instead of a low contrast font, a serif font or a high contrast font, due to the familiarity of a wide group of readers?
So obviously we didn't test, I mean, the variable font doesn't reach the serif space, okay, so we couldn't test the serif things, but I agree with you that there might be some impact on familiarity. I honestly think that the potential of the algorithm, more than a reading speed task, is probably in a visual acuity task, because in those kind of tasks, like in a long distance task, for example, or fast recognition, because in those tasks, habit I don't think is that relevant, but then the ergonomy of the letter, how it adapts to the visual system, I think it's more relevant. So I suspect that for this specific experiment, maybe habit had some kind of impact. It's hard to tell. I think the paradigm has much more potential for visual acuity long distance tasks. That's my feeling.
You mentioned that the reading speed increased over time for all participants.
Yes.
It might kind of correlate with that they got used to whatever they were seeing during that time. So the effect of the what they were used before is going down over time in the test.
Yes.
I think.
However, one of the things I don't want to emphasize, I mean, I mentioned that, but I didn't want to emphasize that, is because it's not exactly a parameter that defines the success of the experiment. Let me tell you what, because the starting position is random. We don't know yet if the people who didn't get the speed increase was because the experiment didn't work on them, or it randomly started in a good position for them. Okay, so you might have started in a good position, find something, and then keep exploring, but not being able to find something that will defeat those coordinates. We haven't looked at the data that way yet.
I'm sorry if you said it and I missed it. Do you test this in different font sizes? Or
No, just one. Yeah. It was sorry, it was 3 years ago. I don't exactly remember, but it was something like 80 centimeters and then rather high in the screen, so we wouldn't have pixelation, or we have a little pixelation as possible of the characters. Yes, in dark room and blah, blah.
what size would that be?
I have it. I'll look it for you, okay? Because I can't give you an exact, but it was comfortable. It was a comfortable reading situation, okay?
My main question was like, do you think the results would change if the size would change?
To be honest, I hope so. I hope so. Because okay. So let me explain you a little bit. When I got this first, that's the reason why we give it so much credibility is because I thought this makes sense. I mean they're reading at distance, then they're having these characters larger or whatever. So it made sense to me from a typographic point of view. But then we kept analyzing the data, and we saw that the linear regression data didn't make sense with these clusters. So as I said, I think this tool has much more potential when actually reading situation. It's definitely it's a low vision reading situation. Yeah.
It seems to make sense scientifically to isolate each axis on its own and allow the algorithm to adjust each one
Yes.
individually. But it may well be that the idea is to adjust many axes together, like the idea of weight is 3 or 4 of these axes moving together.
Yeah.
So if the algorithm I wonder if the algorithm might prefer to deal with these higher level concepts.
Yes. So you mean like instead of having like a X opaque axis, for example, have a weight axis? Good. So sometimes that's something that definitely needs to be tried. Okay, and I'm actually hopefully planning to try it pretty soon. From at least the way my mind works, the problem is that if you are implementing weight like this, and then you're implementing width also in the same way, that if you implement width canonically, when you expand the letter, you also need to adjust the stem. So with those factors together, the problem you have is that actually some points in space become unreachable for your font. There are very few points, but they actually become unreachable. And the way I picture it is that if you have a extremely super extra bold N, letter N, and you see it at quite far, you're probably gonna see it because it's detectable, but it's not discriminable because you cannot see the counter shape of the letter. Okay, so my point is that legibility depends. It's not that depends on the black part. It's not that depends on the white part, but it depends in a very specific balance. And when you are modifying an axis where that you're modifying actually both elements, and as I said, like kind of built arbitrarily because it will depend on my will, and my extra ball might just look different than somebody else's ball, and the interpolation might just be different. Then I felt that that if I had built an axis like this, it would be a little bit like creating an axis that changes at the same time serifs and x height. Kind of. Okay, so I thought, by that time I was familiar with the parametric approach to typography, and then I thought that it was an excellent case.
The problem is that each type designer will have a different method.
Exactly. But then that's why I use units of m to define the whole thing. So in theory, for example, let me show you this slide. Sorry. Here. So let's imagine that we find the successful candidate for all the participants, and if you want to do it, I think it's more interesting to find individual candidates. But if you want to do it, you can average them and then get a universal candidate for all of them. Well, I mean, because the units of these coordinates have units of m, let's imagine that that's the universal candidate. Well, you have your units there for the stem, the negative space in between the ends to build your font, and then the contrast value. So then if you want to have a different A, different E, as long as you follow more or less the standard, what we believe, the shape of letters, then you have a very strong base to actually build a font. Okay, so one of the things I really wanted with this research was build something that actually made sense for type designers. So I could give you coordinates so you could understand, okay, so this is what's happening. These are the values that kind of make sense. If that could be x13, 14, and then y14, and then whatever, and then I think it wouldn't make that much sense. But then the fact that there are units of n, we might have a different approach to type design, but at least we have a common ground to begin. I'm scared now.
In the Readability Consortium, we're doing some work that's related, although not at all the same. We're also finding that you can tune fonts individuals, and that gives individual readers benefits that they will want. What do you think a future looks like for type designers in which readers are accustomed to the benefits that individuation brings?
Yes. Well, I don't know if David Berlow is here. I think the parametric approach he's been developed, I think it's brilliant, and I think it's a very strong foundation to create all these individual profiles. I've been dreaming a little bit about the potential and the paths for this to follow, like especially if because I think this has an enormous potential not only to measure reading speed, for example, but also you can plug this paradigm to eye trackers. And then you can start getting incredible information about comfort and reading, at a level that it's very hard to reach otherwise. So I can imagine, cameras in our devices developing and being able to eye track us and then understand how we read. And then I can imagine books that adapt their font to the part that you are and how intense you're reading at that point. And I think, at least until machines take control, I think there's a lot of potential for type designers to create but then we need to start thinking in this concept of hyper-flexible fonts. We should talk. We will. Okay. Any more questions? Well, thanks a lot.